Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. The COVID era has put retail transformation under the spotlight, and no one better to tap into their experience and insights on the road left behind and the path ahead than retail transformation specialist and fellow top 100 global influencer, Oliver Banks. Oliver and I talk about keeping pace with the rate of change in retail, from having fun by fostering an experimental edge to reaffirming your company's mission. Oliver offers a host of ways that retailers can deliver positive transformation in today's rapidly changing times.
And that's probably the biggest challenge with regard to transformation going forward, is do we revert back to the slow way of doing things, or do we keep some of the pace and some of the experimental nature that we learned during the pandemic? That's going to be certainly an interesting challenge. And I think the best companies who, by the way, we're already pretty good at change, let's be honest, will continue to beat that drum and continue to evolve their operations, their operating model, and their business for sure.
Let's listen in now. Oliver, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing?
Michael, I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here with you today.
Well, you and I were brought together, so to speak, in this big universe of podcasting and business and retail by Steve Dennis. You were hosting, I believe, the first launch of the original book, Remarkable Retail. That's where I came to know you, and now I listen to your podcast, and it's such a treat to have you join me on mine. I'm so keen to hear more about what you do and kind of dive in. But let's start at the beginning. Tell us about yourself and personal professional journey and the work you do and the podcast you host.
Yeah, it's absolutely, it's been great getting to know you over the past year, and of course being together on Steve's second book launch as well, right? So I am based in the UK, and I'm a retail transformation specialist. So I work with retailers to help them change and evolve their operations and their operating models. I host the Retail Transformation Show podcast and also live virtual event as well, Retail Transformation Live.
And when we talk about transformation, unpack that a little bit for me. So, you have advice and a podcast about it, but where do you start that journey of transformation? Is this a digital transformation? Is this cultural? Is it all of the above?
Yeah, well, I've got a bit of an allergic reaction that happens when someone says digital transformation, to be honest, because all transformation tends to be digital now. We live in a digital world. There is very little that happens that doesn't involve some form of digital system or integration, whatever it is, to be honest. And equally, if you are doing a new system upgrade, a true digital transformation, shall we say, it's very likely that it's not just the digital aspects that are involved. But I think calling it a digital transformation can sort of put the blinkers on, and it can get people to think solely about the technology rather than actually what else is happening in the business as we change, as we evolve. So that's, let's not use the term digital transformation, please.
Right on.
But I kind of view transformation as two broad things, and it's quite an overused word, arguably. So I won't try and overuse it myself. But there's basically a fundamental level and an incremental level. And fundamental is, as it suggests, it's a true transformation that is wiping the slate clean, or maybe it's building something completely afresh. Whereas an incremental transformation is more an optimization, a simplification, an improvement that absolutely is still valid. And certainly when you start to get multiple incremental changes building up, they can have a truly transformative effect en masse.
So I want to get back to the whole state of transformation, if I can, in the COVID era. But I do also want to take advantage of your location in the UK and with proximity to Europe. Tell us a little bit about the state of retail in England and how you see it across Europe. It seems to be, looking from the outside in with a bit of envy, I must say, from Canada. You're ahead of us in terms of the vaccination program. Things are starting to open up. We all still have to deal with variants, but how is retail responding at tough times? Give us a bit of the state of retail today.
Yeah, so in terms of emerging from COVID, the UK is actually doing pretty well, I think. We've got an advanced vaccine program that is going well so far. And I think that's building the confidence. Our stores are reopened now. Our pubs and restaurants have just reopened as well. There are still limits, and obviously masks are still required as well. But what we're seeing is footfall is slowly returning to physical retail. Workplaces are slowly beginning to open. Physical meetings between people are slowly starting to happen. But I use that word slowly very intentionally there, because I don't think it's the bounce back that perhaps we all originally hoped for. We saw some big bounces as things initially started to open, but I think it will be a gradual return to normality, if you want to use that word.
Now, do you think what drives that gradual return? I mean, it's interesting because we saw here where I am in Toronto, we had a period in mid-February where the government things simmered down a little bit, and the government pulled back on the limitations. The malls opened up literally for 2 weeks, and then we had to slam it shut. We got caught with variants, and it got really bad. We're still shut down. Essential retail still shut down here. But the malls literally had to close. They had so many people. Like, people rushed back to the store. But I feel like it's a short-term reaction to what's missing in our life, but I'm not sure that there's a, that there you can sustain that. How are you talked about a gradual return. Is it a gradual return because people are just cautious to re-engage in society again because of the virus, or because they've changed the way they shop or the way they run their lives?
I think all of the above, first and foremost. We also saw, opening day, long queues, etc. But that's almost the hype and the excitement of actually getting out of your house and going to do something different, perhaps seeing your friends, etc. I think we, of course, have got to take into account the changing consumer habits, everything from working from home. I can't see that going back fully to where we were. Obviously, the rise of e-commerce. Again, I can't see that fully going back to where it was. So I think there is this step change that has happened in the world of consumers' lives that will never come back. I suspect there's a huge element of building confidence. The vaccine will help build confidence. There's going to be a lot of awkwardness as well. I'm interested to see the first live face-to-face event and seeing the awkwardness between different people. Like, do I get too close? Do I not? So yes,
do I shake hands? Do I not? Like,
you want to, and I don't want to.
Yeah, I know. I hit elbows, but that feels like just weird.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's going to be all the extroverts chatting away and high-fiving and everything, and then the introverts sort of like, oh, I need to see you through a computer screen, right?
Yeah. But, it was an introvert's paradise for the past 18 months, right? This is great. It's a fascinating time. Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the state of retail transformation. It feels like we've never had a catalyst for transformation, an external exogenous catalyst like COVID since, I don't know, the Second World War, even if that's similar. Do you see it the same way? And I guess where I'm going with this is I think sometimes that the end of the COVID era means the end of the mission, means the end of the drive for retail transformation. Or have we ignited a retail transformation? Is your work easier than it was before? How you see it?
Well, that's the $1 million question, right? You're absolutely right. We've never had that trigger moment that has incited so much change in such a short amount of time. And I'm sure we can all reflect on different examples or stories we've heard, even where we've seen or done a huge change very quickly. Back in March, April in particular last year. I think what we've seen since is actually that rate of change has slowed because the urgency has gone away, or the initial change has actually been delivered. And that's probably the biggest challenge with regard to transformation going forward, is do we revert back to the slow way of doing things, or do we keep some of the pace and some of the experimental nature that we learned during the pandemic? That's going to be certainly an interesting challenge. And I think the best companies who, by the way, were already pretty good at change, let's be honest, will continue to beat that drum and continue to evolve their operations, their operating model, and their business for sure.
Well, I'm sure in your work, it's a lot of culture in transformation. I mean, you highlight
Definitely.
your talk about it really isn't about technology, it's about culture. And I've talked to many CEOs who said, listen, we've never had such a galvanizing mission. You know, we didn't have to align people to get through COVID. We all knew there was a mission. But as that mission thankfully fades, is that part that becomes, you know, what do you think retailers will retain from that kind of fast moving? But as it feels like it's going to get harder than easier, even compared to the before time, because you had a mission. There's a bit of exhaustion, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think that's going to be something that's coming over the next couple of years, by the way. I think it'll be a long tail exhaustion piece and burnout piece and so on.
Yeah, I mean, as the mission fades, as the exhaustion starts to set in, I feel like transformation will become, hey, we've done that. We transformed for COVID.
Yes.
Are you concerned about that?
I think there is this perception potentially that yes, transformation is done. We have done our curbside rollout. We've done click and collect. We are omnichannel. Tick the box. Next. But actually, transformation is more of an evolving beast, right? The world continues to change, and retailers and all businesses, in fact, must change with it, right? So unless the world decides to stand still, which I can't see happening anytime soon, then that change is inevitable as a cycle. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to sit on your laurels and wait until crisis actually emerges, you know, your own personal, individual business crisis, whereby you actually are once again forced from a point of urgency, you know, maybe poor financials, for example, you're forced to transform. That's not going to be a pleasant scenario. Whereas if you keep that evolution up, then you don't have to go through that wholesale change. Look at Amazon, right? They're the poster child for continuing to transform, in my view.
Right.
They're continually trying new things. Not everything works, and some things back out, right? And that's okay. But actually, what is interesting, what massive changes did Amazon do as a result of the pandemic? Nothing major, in my view. They did some pretty clever stuff around temperature probing colleagues as they're working, etc., just to assess if someone has coronavirus. But there weren't, from a proposition perspective, there weren't any major shifts. It wasn't like they decided, oh my goodness, we must do this, because they've already started on that journey and they're continuing on it. And, you know, they've got that change or transformation momentum, which is so powerful as an organization, because it gets the entire team, you know, in terms of culture, gets that entire team accepting transformation and familiar with how to go about doing it as well.
It is part of their DNA right from the beginning. You're absolutely right? I mean, you don't join a retailer like Amazon to ride out the rest of your career in peace. You know, it's not the place for you. And, you know, talk about a little bit about lessons that retailers should learn, the listeners should learn from the COVID era itself. I mean, we can see the end zone, the goalposts keep moving a little bit, but we can see the end zone. What is there anything you would say that retailers should take away from this time that they should capture, and then one thing they should leave behind permanently? From their experience.
So there are lots of things. I think first and foremost, try new things, right? We've evaded fear of failure because we've had to do something. And it turns out the majority of changes that every company have delivered have been pretty all right. There's been nothing catastrophic that has gone wrong. Things evolve, as they always do, as I was just saying, right? So try new things. Take that experimental edge that you've had over the last year and continue to have fun and have creativity, right? I think it's also worthwhile looking at how your people are, how your colleagues are. We've become a lot more considerate, both of ourselves and of others as well. And I'd hate to see that disappear. So that's got to be something that we continue to take forward. And I think actually it could get even easier, right? As we have revert back to more face-to-face meetings and catch-ups and offices and shopping and everything like that. I'd love to see that consideration of people as people rather than doers, shall we say.
Well, I think we've never had a glimpse in society into people's personal lives and this intersection of the personal and professional like we've had in the past 18 months, right? You know, whether it's the dog barking or the kid climbing on your lap or, you see people's apartments or places like you never had that intersection, right? For good or ill sometimes.
Definitely. I think that helps to open things up in terms of just having a general conversation. There's still the more that we can do, to be honest, for sure. Right. But yes, I definitely think that's a lesson we have to take forward. Third lesson I'd suggest is thinking about what's the point of any given proposition or channel or even your whole business, right? Why are you doing it? Why should a customer care? Why should a colleague care? Why should you care? And I think that whole point around purpose, which again is quite overused as a term in my view, is really important still, because if you can't be clear in very plain English terms why a given thing exists or why a given thing is happening, then it just loses that mission, and it loses the focus, and it loses the direction, and it gets a whole lot more complicated.
Retailers sometimes can be creatures of habit, organizationally, culturally, and all things. As a transformation expert, you would know that all too well. What, if anything, you could get your arms around that retailers should say, you know what, we used to do these things, we're never going to do that. We're going to leave that behind. I've had, for example, some retailers say, I used to want that bum in the seat, right? When I had my organization, I wanted everybody in the office every day, 5 days a week, or I felt like I couldn't lead, or I felt like we weren't being productive. That comes up. Anything come to mind? Maybe that's jumps out to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. I think we touched on it earlier. The procrastination piece, I think, has got to be something that we leave behind. There's obviously a number of different reasons why any given individual or organization may choose to procrastinate over something, but it is a choice. And we have seen the advantage of taking a faster pace, taking a more agile approach, building minimum viable products and just experimenting. That has got to be, for me, the thing to leave behind. It's not deferred decision making. It's not inconclusive trial results. It's not I can't decide, or I'm not going to decide, or it's lower priority than I need to think about. We've proved to ourselves what we can do when we set our mind to it. And I don't want to revert back to fear of making a decision in many ways.
Do you think customers are going to come along with that ride? I've heard and perceived that there was some customer forgiveness for imperfections. You described a minimal viable product. I mean, certainly when many retailers stood up curbside for the first time, it was let's describe it as suboptimal. But there was some forgiveness. Yeah, right. I'm going through one of those suboptimal experiences right now.
Not in this interview, I hope.
Yeah, it is actually.
Oh, no.
They say I got it. I say I didn't. I didn't check the order at the curb. And now we're in a Mexican standoff. We can't agree who's got the product. Anyway, that customers' forgiveness will start to evaporate as the COVID era evaporates. In other words, their patience for imperfection. Or do you think that customers have changed a little bit too?
Great question. I think it will fade, and I think it won't fade so much with regard to the sort of the wider pandemic, but it's going to fade if your competitors are doing it properly. If they are making mistakes and you are making mistakes, that's the normal place, right? That's what customers' expectations are set by. But if everyone else around you is leveling up and you are still, let's say, making mistakes or giving a lumpy experience, that's not going to look particularly good. So you've got to keep pace. And I think, we've seen it with Amazon, right? I've touched on them already. But the shipping speeds, Amazon are continually leveling up, and that gets the new standard. In the UK, one of the big themes that we're seeing right at the moment is quick commerce and 10-minute grocery deliveries, in particular in London, like all across London.
10 minutes? How do you get anywhere in London in 10 minutes? I've driven in London before. How do you get, what are they, droning it? How do you get anywhere in London in 10 minutes?
Scooters and bikes and, very clever distributed warehouse layouts and organizations, I think. But it's the same path that we've been on for the past couple of decades, right? Faster. And I think it's an incredibly, in terms of, reverting back, in terms of customer expectations, it's incredibly easy as a consumer to see what's available and say, that's okay. Or rather, you start with, that's great, right? And then and then it's good. And then, it's okay. And then, what? You don't do a 10-minute delivery? What? It's going to take half an hour. Oh, man.
Yeah. I don't know, though. It does feel like, and years ago, I thought fast delivery was more a niche than it was a mainline thing. And in some ways, at least here, delivery is slowed. It certainly is slowed down just by, the package carriers have to keep their people safe. And so delivery isn't as quick as it used to be. And I wonder if people are like, hey, I really didn't need it in the day. I really could survive a couple of days. Or do you think that'll regress back to the mean and that the race for curbside rapidity will resume?
Yeah, well, it's a huge question, that sort of speed piece around, do you really need it? You're absolutely right to raise that question. Do you really need your groceries in 10 minutes? Now, if you're in the middle of baking a cake, then perhaps maybe you do, but they're quite niche cases, right? Yeah, I think this will actually probably be driven by sustainability in terms of, actually, do I want to have vans driving up and down all day long, or actually, could I wait, for one drop a week? And we're starting to see some companies do that. I think there's opportunity as well for some of the couriers to be working together to drive some of that as well, of course. But I do think it will begin to ease off for some elements. But of course, I still think we're very much on the faster is better journey at the moment. But it will come. It will come.
Let's talk about one last element about transforming a culture, certainly, and this work from home movement that where organizations said, "Well, never work from home," did it in a week, and now I think we're getting to a new place where, and I wanted your thoughts on it, where you can now hire senior leaders that aren't located physically where your headquarters is, and that for many retailers expands their scope of talent outside their own geographic limits. But of course, there's the cultural element, right? The cultural element, right? It was not really conceived of that you'd have your vice president of marketing somewhere else. But is that the case now, that you can transform a culture from your desktop? Is that more acceptable? Is that something? I'm always hesitant to say this changes everything, but my feeling some days is that the COVID era will change this perception about how we work more than it will change many other things. How are you feeling, and what are you experiencing with your clients about that?
It's a really interesting point. I think it very much depends on the existing culture. I can certainly think of some companies that are very quick to call people back to the office as soon as it is sort of socially acceptable to travel for work, even if it's not recommended. Let's say they were back in the office. And the wording and phrasing was quite interesting for some of those companies in terms of, we must be together to collaborate, or we must be together to do, team working and to have team meetings and this and that and everything else.
Or even more subtly, you hear this: if you really want to advance your career, if you're really a keen person, you'll show up. Like, that's very, very nefarious, actually, I found.
Yeah, and
very passive aggressive way of describing it to me.
I think those cultures, that's, let's be honest, that's led by leadership, right? That's led by the boss saying to their team, "Thou shalt do this," and them those direct reports then saying to their teams, "Thou shalt do this as well." It's possible to change. I can't see it changing, because certainly if you're promoting people up the chain from inside the company, it's the same lessons that you've got, right? I think you definitely can transform, but it does take a strong will to be able to evolve a culture at the best of times, let's be honest. But you definitely can do it from a work from home situation in terms of just changing things, right? And it does start from leadership, and it does start from having an intentional viewpoint as to how you're going to change it. Is it going to be that actually you want to be more considerate of your colleagues? You want to be more mindful? Is it that you want to add more creativity? Is it that you want to be faster and make decisions faster? What is it that culture change is going to be about? And then it's a question of embodying that through the Zoom window or the Teams window or whatever it is that you're using, as well as using other channels, right? It doesn't need to only be video conferencing. Phone's still good. You may blend in even
phone still works.
Face-to-face, occasional face-to-face meetings in there as well. All of these things, we talk about omni-channel, right, in terms of going out to customers, but actually, how are you going to use omni-channel for your internal operating model as well, right? What does that mean?
That's such a great point. That's such a great point. I've been reflecting on, organizations that are more successful than others haven't taken their approach to work and culture and just put it on to a camera. They're starting to think in very dynamic ways, like let's get everyone together at a conference and then get a hotel meeting room. And we'll do that. It used to be an annual thing. Let's do it now because we're saving office space dollars and not everyone's in the office every day. Let's do that, around big conferences.
Yeah.
Or let's do that like quarterly and think, how do we actually change? And it's such a brilliant way you put it, that kind of omni-channel approach to even running your organization. It's really, really brilliant. All right. Well, listen, Oliver, it's been such a great conversation. I love the work you do, and I encourage everybody to listen to the podcast. I'll put links into the show notes so they can listen and enjoy your thoughts and wisdom some more. And thanks so much for being on the Voice of Retail podcast. I look forward to seeing you in person. I haven't been over to Europe in pretty much the longest time in many years, so I look forward to walking the streets again of London and joining you for a beverage or two, or vice versa. So thanks again for joining me.
Definitely. Well, it's been wonderful chatting. You're an amazing host, Michael, and you're doing brilliant things in the world of retail. And thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Voice of Retail. Be sure and follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy podcasts so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of LeBlanc Company Inc. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe, have a great week.